Can Jason Anderson keep this momentum rolling as we head to the East Coast? And we've got a full list of new riders establishing themselves as frontrunners for our 250 East Coast Championship. Which one of those guys will come out on top on round one? All that and more coming up on today's Daily Grind. I'm Derek Harris, and I'm super excited you're here to join me as we discuss what's going on in AMA Pro Supercross racing. So let's take a deep dive in the East Coast 250s and a little bit of 450 discussion. I've got a good friend of mine I'm bringing on board to help me with this discussion. His name is Tyler Deering of Gate Drop News.
So I wanted to get to a 250 pre-race show.
Yes.
We'll talk a little bit on 450s. Before we get to 250s, I wanted to ask you if you had to take all of your life savings, put it on one guy in the 450 class to win this championship, who do you have as of today and why?
As of right now, and this could change because, in Supercross, they ride right on the edge. It's got to be Jason Anderson. I mean, switching teams over to Kawasaki, he's just had like this career resurgence that I just didn't see at all. I had a video a while back saying that I didn't think that Kawasaki was even going to get a win this year between Cianciarulo coming off injury and Anderson just not really looking like himself at Husky. I didn't think it was going to happen at all, but he has proved me completely wrong. And the example I'll use is this weekend when Tomac kind of passed him coming out of the rhythm section. He checked up, gassed it back by him in the same corner, and then checked out. And I was like, oh man, this guy, he's got the mentality of like, I am going to beat you no matter what it takes. So I don't think anybody's going to beat him. I mean, maybe Tomac, but at this point, a lot of the guys that we thought were going to contend, like Webb and Roxon, I mean, they're 25. Roxon's over 40 points out. So, I mean, unless they're winning 4 or 5 races, they're not going to catch him.
You are exactly what our industry needs more of. Because if I'm not mistaken, you've never owned or ridden a motocross bike.
No, absolutely not. And that's one of the crazy things. Is that I'm just, very passionate about it, but I don't quite have that riding experience that a lot of people in the moto industry do.
That's exactly what our industry and sport needs. And I hope that people who watch this understand that, because at the end of the day, the pundits on ESPN or Fox Sports, most of them have never played football or basketball. Mm-hmm. They're just journalists. They just have their takes. They're analysts, because the difference between a great athlete and a great analyst is pretty big. They're not the same thing. So I think our sport needs to open up to that you don't have to be a rider to have a fair or honest opinion. And I think that's really, really cool. Our sport. And the other thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that even the majority of people who ride, they're not anywhere in the same category as these elite supercross guys, right? Like you can even be a local pro, which I've raced too and whatnot, and you're still light years behind these elite supercross athletes. They're just freaks, right? Like they're unbelievable. They said we're going to have 7 or 8 winners this year. And to be honest with you, I would be shocked if we have more than 4, just based upon what we've seen. We have not seen anybody have the pace of Tomac or Anderson when those guys are anywhere near the front, other than Chase Sexton. And so he's that third guy. But outside of that, I guess Kenny won, right? Like he got the first round. But to me, it looks, I hate to say this, but I think as of right now, his supercross season's over.
Yeah, 100%.
Mentally, he's checked out. Whatever it is with the bike he's unhappy with, it is what it is. But I just think, unfortunately, and I love Kenny. I think you do too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that is the Roxon jersey right there.
Yeah.
But no, he just, I don't know if it's mental. I don't know if it's bike. I think oftentimes it's more bike than people realize. But I mean, he was jumping through the whoops at A3. Like Kenny,
when does that happen?
That doesn't happen. That literally never happens. And to see him like early in the race jumping the whoops was just hard to watch.
He literally did it since lap 1.
Yeah.
So that was bad. I agree with you there. So well, that's a good pick. I'm actually on the same train as you. I'm the Anderson train right now. I think he's been the best guy on the track every single weekend, but he's had a little bit of bad luck, bike mechanical issue. And then he had the takeout from Bam Bam, which, is what it is. So I will say that he's my pick too. I really am pulling for him. He's riding amazing. I think he looks great, but we can't overlook the fact that this is the best Tomac has ever been in the first 6 races of his season.
Agreed. Yes. No, Tomac usually gets better as the season progresses. So it's scary to see him coming out and winning races early on. Now, I don't know if it's going to be enough to take out Anderson. Like, I don't know if it's going to be one guy runs away with it. I could see like a very close battle down to the end. But I'm with you. I mean, I had, I think, 5 or 6 winning this year. And, outside of Sexton, just nobody seems to have that like raw top end pace that the top 2 have right now. So
it's weird how our sport works like that. Yeah, I agree. It's like once the gate drops, like gate drop news, once that gate drops, all of a sudden, all of that hype and all of that conjecture coming into the season goes right out the window. It seems like people line up and then they kind of fit in their positions for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
The big question mark is Webb. Everybody's saying inside his camp and around that circle that he will be better East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it hard mid-season to go from literally 5 to 8 and then magically change your stars to be a winner. But we did see it late in the outdoor season last year.
Yes. And he turned it on. He was pretty off the pace at the beginning of the outdoor season. But I don't know, because at first I thought it was the bike, but then Marv rode really well in A3. Like he was up there and he was actually faster than Anderson and Tomac before he went down in the sand section with the lap rider and then kind of mounted his charge back and finished okay. But he looked really good and he's been off the pace like in several events. So I wasn't entirely sure if it was the bike. He is usually better on the East, but man, I don't know. I'm a little worried. Like seeing him down in 8th is just like you're waiting for him to make that Cooper Webb move where he sneaks up and gets second and he just goes the wrong way. It's very odd to see.
Yeah, on my Sunday post-race take show, I did comment on what I'm seeing with the KTM bikes. Now, I could be totally off base, but I just personally think they don't have the bike to where he's comfortable to turn it like he's been able to turn in the past.
Yeah.
He's not able to cut under like we saw with Tomac on the Jason Anderson pass attempt. And Tomac had made that pass work in the heat races against other riders where he was cutting under, hitting that rhythm section and turning on a dime. So let's move on to the 250s. I wrote down a list because I was trying to prepare for this and I was racking off names off the top of my head and I came up with something like 20. But then I went to the pre-entry list, okay, and I was absolutely floored. I think I play fantasy, this is a fantasy nightmare coming into East Coast because there are 30 to 35 people who I think probably can make main events, but obviously that's usually not how it shakes down, just like winners. So I'm going to go off a list really quickly, and if you want to pause me at any point, if you have a comment, let me know. So I'm going to start off with what we know as factory guys. So we have J Mart at Monster Energy Factory, Monster Energy Star Racing. We have Levi, the Chef Kitchen. And then moving on from that team, you're going to have RJ Hampshire. And I did not realize that he had a teammate out there.
Yep, Styles
Robertson. So we haven't heard much from him in a while. He's going to be on that coast. And then you have the Monster Energy Pro Circuit Kawasaki boys with Austin Faulkner, Cameron McAdoo, and the rookie Jett Reynolds. Let's move over to to me, they're a factory team. They're not really factory, which is I'll ask you your take on that in a bit. But Preston Kilroy and Derek Drake over at Bar X Suzuki. And then you have Max Boland at Factory KTM and Jet Lawrence at Factory Honda. And I believe those are all of the what I would consider manufacturers' best offerings in each, in the class.
Yes, there is. There's actually, I've got a couple sleeper picks that we can talk about later.
Okay, so let me go down the list of guys that are on rides. They're really good, and then we'll talk about them. So we have Cody Shock, Kyle Peters, who are going to be on the Phoenix Racing Honda team. They have one other rider. He's on my list, and I'll get to him. We have Pierce Brown on the Factory Gas Gas. I forgot about him. Factory Gas Gas rider. Mitchell Oldenburg racing for XPR. For Moto Concepts Racing with the XPR Power this year. You have Josh Osby coming in. Cullen Park. He's the other Phoenix rider. It's Cullen Park. Jordan Smith.
Yes.
I want to get back to him. Remind me on that.
Yes.
Okay. We have Grant Harlan. He's a Texas boy. He's really solid. You have Luke Neese, Jace Kessler, and we're also going to have John Short. He's a friend of mine. He's going to be on the show on Sunday. Styles Robertson, as we talked about. Then you have Phil Nicoletti, Enzo Lopes, and Jace Owen on the Club MX Yamahas. Jarrett Fry. You have Josh Barise, who's was a storied amateur for a while. Jeremy Hand, I think he's made some mains. Lane Shaw's out of Texas, made some mains. TJ Albright, I think he's made a main or two. AJ Canonzero, the famous YouTuber now, doing his Moto Academy stuff. Hunter Yoder, and then I watched this guy in Florida early in the year in January, Brian Sue, HSU. He was fast, really fast. So I was shocked. I think he's going to be surprisingly good. And then I have Zach Williams on my list of people that, potentially could make a main event.
Perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, it's crazy from a fantasy perspective because like you said, there are so many guys that could make a main event and not only make a main event, but run top 15 and then miss one the next week. So it's a total nightmare if you're in charge of picking them because, man, I mean, you could have a guy literally run 14th one night and then not even run that badly and miss the main event next weekend.
We might see factory guys not make mains.
I think we might. I mean, I've got the whole list of factory guys here, and there's a couple that have really not impressed me that much, to be honest. Now, the guys like RJ Hampshire that don't have wins, they're going to make main events. We know that. But in terms of like competitive up front, it's going to be a dogfight. And then even competitive to get in the show, it's going to be a dogfight. So
100%. I'm not excited. I'm playing fantasy. You're playing fantasy. I'm not excited. I am excited, but I think we're going to have weeks where I make like 0 points in this class. And then you go through the fences and you get a couple of those alternative guys in, and you're going to be making like 200 points, in just a 250. So who do you have for this title and why?
So I made a video a couple weeks ago saying my Jett Lawrence was going to win it. And I went off of past results just because Austin Forkner, and I won't repeat myself too much because you can check that video out. But, Forkner is coming off the collarbone injury from last season. Plus, he has been in this class since 2017 and has not won a championship primarily because he can't stay healthy. Not because he's not fast, but because he just can't stay on the bike. So I don't think Forkner is going to be a real challenge. McAdoo's coming off an injury. Jett Reynolds is a rookie. Jay Martin has not been the fastest in Supercross. Like, he's a ringer outdoors. And I think he might be able to get a couple, wins here and there, but I don't think he has the consistency or the pace to keep up with Jett on a Supercross track.
The only question I have with Jett on that front is that he hurt his collarbone about 6 weeks ago. It's typically a 6-week injury if you're taking your time and doing it quote unquote right. So I'm curious. I would think he probably did 3 weeks off, maybe a limited 4th week, and then maybe he's really been full swing for a week or two. The question being, I know he was ready to go for West Coast. His pace was good. I have some insight over there. He was fast. I heard he was really fast. So the question is, did that hurt his confidence? Didn't look like it in that media pre-show that they had. And did it hurt his fitness, or did it hurt his, his sharpness on the bike? That's the only question I have with Jett, because he is my favorite for the class. But touching on J Mart, yes, he hasn't been the best guy in Supercross. But if you go back to the season, he came back off his broken back, which was with Geico Honda. He was like a 3rd to 4th place guy, like really consistently good that season. I don't recall. I think it was Craig, or I don't recall who was up front that year, but he was actually really good coming off of such a major injury. I think with his veteran knowledge, where he's at in fitness, and then looking at the class, he actually could be a championship contender if Jett cannot stay on 2 wheels. Now, I think Jett is obviously a very smooth rider, but J Mart might be the guy that is just there seconds and thirds, and he pulls what I call a dungy every single week.
Yeah. And that's what it takes, because everybody thinks that you got to go win 5 races, but you can win a championship winning 2 races. You just can't crash. And, what we've seen in the 250 West is we've seen guys like Joe Shimoda, who'd been really consistent, lose his foot peg and crash last weekend, hurt his ankle. He's out. And just, you've seen through the class guys not be able to stay healthy. And then we've got Christian Craig running away with it. Hunter Lawrence was right in there until he crashed on the whoops last weekend. So it's like, if J Mart can stay healthy and Jett even has 1 slip up, that's all it takes. Miss 1 round, finish badly in 1 main event, and have J Mart just consistently get those thirds. It could happen. I don't think it will, mostly because I just want to be right. But I don't know. I'm very interested. I do want to get your take on Styles. Now, I know you said you weren't aware that RJ had a teammate. What do you think of Factory Husky, and do you think that they're going to be competitive this year on the East?
It's a great question. So I just completely forgot he was over on that side of his squad. So when I was looking over the entry list, like, oh yeah, Styles, and he's very good, but we haven't quite seen his best foot forward in Supercross yet.
Although he finished second in Daytona. He did finish second in Daytona in second race.
He was a storied amateur. So we actually had some guys that raced against him and stuff. I mean, he was a top amateur. He should be an elite guy if he can get his game together. I mean, that's who people picked him to be. Hampshire was not confident in his pre-race show, or the pre-race press conference, about that bike. I don't know if you listened to it, but he said something like, yeah, I got it. It's just been a struggle. We haven't had much time. I finally went out to California, and I think we made progress, but it's already laying the framework to have an excuse to not be successsul. If the bike is that bad, and it's a factory bike, I can't imagine it is, but if it's that bad,
like, there's just no way.
How do you not have that sorted out? But go race last year's bike. If it's that bad, I just don't think that that's the case. I can't imagine it's that bad. I think the bike's probably, it's good enough to win. On the flip side of that, you have Voland riding the same bike, right? And he's been really happy. He was like, no, I love the bike. We've been good since day one. I'm riding better than ever. And his footage, his whoops look fantastic in off-season videos. So I do think that Voland is the actual dark horse for me in this title. I don't think he can win the title, but he was way faster than I expected him to be last year. obviously hurt his hip in the whoops. If he can not crash, he was really fast last year, goes out and leads that first outdoor almost convincingly until his bike let go.
Yeah. And I was looking back at his outdoor results. They weren't fantastic. But I don't know if you've seen the Instagram picture of like the team pic with KTM. He is growing like a weed.
Yeah.
That guy is like, he's listed at 5'11. He might be 6'1. And specifically in the whoops, we've seen so many problems this year, but the taller riders statistically have an advantage there. So with him growing, if he can kind of come into his own and find that comfort zone, I could see him actually being really good in the whoops, which would be huge because I mean they've been gnarly on the West Coast. So if they keep up that trend, you're going to lose a lot of guys just specifically to those whoops.
I agree entirely. So we'll see how that goes. Those are the kind of unknowns. I think the bigger question at Pro Circuit is going to be who's the top rider there, Cameron McAdoo or Austin Forkner? Based off the results last year, you're going to have to actually say that McAdoo might be the front runner in that team.
He might be. The thing is, I mean, he had so many crashes in Atlanta. He was crashing in outdoors. He's coming off that knee injury. I don't have the confidence that he can keep it on two wheels because he is fast, but he has to hang it all out there to be fast. Almost like a James Stewart, where it was like he didn't know if he was either going to win the race or he was going to crash trying to win it. So
I agree. He certainly needs to figure out how to calm down that hurricane a little bit. But if he does, he did take a big leap forward last year in actual raw pace. And as they always say, it's hard to acquire pace. He had a lot of it last year. So that was interesting to me. So who do you have for some of your off-the-cuff picks? Who are some of your guys that you think are going to be surprisingly good? Maybe your fantasy picks early going into the season.
There's a couple that I'm looking at. I think Cody Shock has to be at the top of my list. Jumped on a 450 in outdoors and tore it up. I mean, he was so good. Not riding with a factory team, but he was the best of the rest pretty much every week, which is hard to do in the 450 class because it wasn't that 250 class, even though they're combined in outdoors. To ride like in the top 10 and outdoor national on 450 is phenomenal.
Phenomenal. Yes.
So I think that he takes a big step forward. He just honestly couldn't get any luck last year. Like he would get taken out in the first corner, which some of that's not your own fault. I mean, it's Supercross, you're bottled up out of the first turn. But I'm looking at Cody Shock, and I want to say Jordan Smith and Jarrett Fry. I'm kind of sold on them, not going to lie, because both guys were on factory rides last year. Smith at Pro Circuit, Fry at Star Yamaha. I think that they could have the speed to at least get up there and run in that kind of like 4th to 7th range, which for fantasy picks, if you're going for that, is great because they're going to have big handicaps at the like early on in the season, and then that's going to rack up those points. Or they could miss the main event and not do it. But for fantasy purposes, I think those two are definitely going to be up there.
Jordan Smith is the most intriguing individual in the class for me this year. He was a solid factory guy. He was a championship contender and in the hunt multiple years. He had some injuries and some little bit of rough luck, but he was fast. He had the raw speed. He was fairly consistent. I'm very curious with him for this one reason. He's going to a privateer effort. It's going to be a very good team, but it is a private offering. We have seen this year that there does not, and I was going to ask you on this, I tell my clients all the time that the engine difference between factory and what we can produce or Twisted or XPR is not very big because the knowledge base has grown from other industries. With four strokes, we have a world to rely on from Indy cars and Formula One and NASCAR and cars. There's a lot of smart people in this space, and dirt bikes is a very small world, a very small segment. So over time, I think that technology gap has closed between the factory teams and the private teams. I actually think the biggest difference is suspension and chassis. And it's not that it's better components. It's that they have a guy on staff 24/7 that works on your bike on the factory team. But if they can get him happy on that bike and happy with that chassis and he's a comfortable place with suspension, which we just don't know, we have to see how the season goes. We've seen with the Vince Freeze moments where clearly a private effort can get good starts. And clearly it has plenty of power to be not only competitive, but at the front of the pack. I don't think I've seen any instances where Freeze's bike looks underpowered to me. He's done every single rhythm he's needed to do. He hasn't gotten pulled down straightaways. He's ripping hole shots. So clearly the private to factory gap is tight.
Yeah.
I would actually say if there's ever a year, and it hasn't happened in at least 15 years, that a privateer could win a main event, it would be this year with Jordan Smith or Mitchell Oldenburg. I've got a little insight on Mitchell. I've been told he's been faster in practice on his 250 than he has been on the 450. Go look at his qualifying times on the 450. They put him right at the front of that 250 pack. So I'd be really, really curious if Mitchell, if he actually brings that speed to the races, could we see probably a heat race win, but could we potentially see, with everything going right, some crashes, maybe the top guys get tangled up, they take each other out, maybe in the first time in 15 years, we see a privateer at least get up on the podium, but potentially bring home a race win.
Absolutely. And I think even looking at the like Club MX has a very deep lineup this year. You've got Jordan Smith, Jarrett Farrar, we already talked about, and then Oldenburg. And the 250 class is known for not making it, like not all the riders are going to make it to the end. We already know that. Oldenburg has shown that in the 450 class, he can survive it. I mean, he's only missed one main event. He missed Oakland. Everything else he made and ran very well. So on the 250 class, if he can just survive late in the season to where 3 or 4 factory guys are out and then get a little bit of luck, he could win by a couple seconds. Like that wouldn't even be a fluke to me. That would be a genuine earned win. Same with Jordan Smith, same with Jarrett Fry. Now, it could also happen where none of them make it past round 3, and then this is a total moot point. But I would definitely agree that for the first time in a long time, we have factory guys that can do it. And I think what you were saying on engine pace is exactly right. Like Freezy is not getting pulled down the straightaway. I mean, his bike does not look underpowered whatsoever. I think it's just that feel of the bike. It definitely feels better on the factory ride. But somebody like a Jordan Smith that has been on a factory ride that can take what he knows from the factory ride to the privateer team is got to be invaluable to that team. So I could definitely see maybe a podium, kind of a long shot for a win, but I think it could happen. It's not out of the possibility.
Right. It's a very unlikely, but if the cards fell the right way, which we have seen with 2 contenders taking each other out in the first turn or getting into a tussle, it's possible that we can see a privateer for the first time in a long time bring home a race win. And I would love to see it. It's been so long. Our sport really needs that. Now, here's an interesting thing. Star Racing Yamaha is a factory effort, but the reality is they're a private effort. So they do get some support from Yamaha. I mean, a lot of support from Yamaha, but the reality is they have complete direction and say over their motorcycle. And that is an entirely in-house engine package at Star, meaning they choose what goes in the cams, they choose what goes in the head, they choose what goes for pistons and rods and parts and pieces. They develop it in-house. That is proof that a private effort can do it. However, they have enough funding and resource behind them to try as many things as they want, where typically a private effort only has so much budget. You eventually run out of money to buy more heads and more cams and more pistons and more parts to try more things. Whereas Star has been able to do that endlessly. And not only endlessly, that Yamaha engine, if your readers do or don't know, even though there's been bike changes since 2014, which is the first generation of this reverse motored bike, it's really been the same platform. You can take a 2014 head and put it on the current 2022. Now, it's not a better head, but it will go on.
It'll work.
Star has been able to evolve that engine year over year over year, as opposed to starting like Honda's doing this year from the ground up. Or starting like Husky and KTM are doing this year from the ground up. And I think that it's odd in our sport from a sales perspective, these manufacturers constantly change their bikes every 3 to 4 years. But from a racing standpoint, it's actually really hard to keep up with all the new bike changes because you're developing on platforms. That played Kawasaki last year with a new model that had to start all over again in parts development. And I was told they were really behind the 8 ball in the engine department at PC early on in the season. They had, we aren't big enough companies, nobody, including PC, to do everything in-house when it comes to parts. So you outsource your piston, you outsource your cam grinds. It might be your spec, but you need somebody to build it for you.
Yes, you have to move it out at some point.
It takes months of time to get those things done, tested, developed, and see if they're better. And I think that that's interesting that Star really is paving a new model for motorsports in motocross and supercross, where maybe the private effort with enough funding is better off than the corporate decision, corporate direction that the factories have historically used and had. What do you think on that?
I would totally agree, because you hear what Tomac's saying, and he's like, I have complete control of what I want to do with the motorcycle. And it was something that he didn't necessarily have at Kawasaki. Now, it's not proof that the factory effort will never be successful, because Anderson moved from factory to factory and has had great success, right up there in the points. But I think for Tomac, somebody that had been there for a while, needing a change of pace, being like, hey guys, I know how to do this. I'm a champion. I need something a little bit different than what you guys are offering. And I need somebody that's willing to change the bike to meet me instead of telling me what the factory wants to do. I think it's an interesting concept. And I think that if we could just get a little bit more money in the sport, that, we'd start to see a lot of privateer teams really have success, because the entry into Supercross versus a NASCAR, an IndyCar, Formula One is so much lower. It is doable. I think if we could change the business model a little bit, and I have a video coming out shortly.
Yeah, I was going to
about that business model.
Yeah. So we'll have to check back on that. Yep.
Yeah, just because I think that if we can get cash flowing more in the right direction, that we can distribute it in a better way, one that makes owning a team profitable, one that doesn't mean that the people that are owning the team, just like motocross, that owning a motocross team will actually make you money in the long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Star Racing team is funded by Bobby Reagan. He's a big car dealership owner. From my understanding, that's where the majority of his initial funding came from. Now they probably have enough funding externally from Monster and some from Yamaha Support and their other sponsors to be profitable. But I would bet money, and we could probably, one of these days, it'd be a great interview to see how long he had to dip into his pocketbook to keep that sport, to keep that team going. And I would be willing to bet it was for a very long time till he finally turned a profit on that team. I've even heard he's turned down sponsors just because he's the way he is. Like, no, I don't like this sponsor. I'm not working with him. So that's another side of him that's unique. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Jason Anderson, he got better this year. Tomac got better this year. Mm-hmm. So they didn't switch bikes, but obviously Anderson's on Tomac's old bike. What do you attribute his improvement to for Jason Anderson?
I think it was just a change of pace. I mean, he'd been with that Husky team. Now, they weren't always Husky. They were KTM for a little bit. But Anderson had been with that same group of guys for a long time. And I think the relationship had eventually kind of stalled out a little bit. I mean, it was still successful. He was still having good runs, but he'd been at that team for so long. I think he just needed a change of pace and somebody just to believe in him. I think the Rockstar guys had almost grown accustomed to what he was going to do, and they weren't they weren't, I don't know what the word is, but they weren't meeting his needs in a way. They needed somebody else to get on that bike. And you've seen with Malcolm Stewart, that bike does have pace. I mean, Stewart's been top 5 most nights. He's running well. That bike's got pace, but I just think that it was time for both of them to try something new. And in this case, it's worked. I was skeptical. I'll be the first one to admit that I did not think that it was going to be the rider. I thought it was more the motorcycle, and they're going to have to take the time to get used to a new motorcycle. They've totally proven me wrong. They've shown that, a new group of guys sometimes is all you need just for that fresh start.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I think Anderson, the bike looks amazing to me. And I've always felt like the factory Kawasaki looked like a fantastic bike. And if anybody needed proof over time, I mean, they've been a really successful team. I think Kawasaki has the longest heritage in our sport of success, if you just look at the statistics on it. So there was a little window there where Suzuki was the winningest 450, despite the fact that their sales sucked. If you go back from basically RC to Dungey to Reed to Roxon, if you look over like a 15-year window, that was a winning package and bike. And it sucked for them because they couldn't sell it, right? Nobody would buy it, even though the platform was capable of winning. But if you really look over the last 40 years, 30 to 40 years of our sport, at the end of the Honda Works bike era, so like coming into the late 80s, Kawasaki has a long, long history of winning in pro racing. Mm-hmm. And if you really look at the history of the 450 program, it's been really good for them. And they've always not only had a good premier rider, but Kawasaki has always had a good, quote unquote, second tier rider. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, this year, AC probably wasn't thinking of himself as that way, and neither Anderson was either. They're both thinking of themselves on the same level, I would believe, in their heads. But it's interesting to me because look back at Joey Savatgy when he left Pro Circuit 250s, he went to Factory Kawasaki, and he was contending for race wins. He was up front. He was setting fast laps. He got hurt, but he was really fast that year. He left the team. I don't recall where he ended up next, and he was way off pace from the year before. You could attribute that to injury, but I really think that was a testament to how good that bike was. Because look at Anderson, comes over instantly, incredibly fast. Cincerillo, when he's healthy, is incredibly fast, and he's proven that he can go the pace. So I do think that's one of the best bikes in the paddock. Now, the Yamaha looks amazing this year. Mm-hmm. They've done, obviously, maybe it's the rider, but they look really dialed, and that's a huge turnaround for that bike, for that platform, and for the public perception of that team, because for quite a while, nobody wanted to touch the factory Yamaha.
No, they were dead in the water, especially when you had like the Cooper Webb era at Yamaha, then him moving to KTM, and it was exactly what we saw with Anderson, like instant success.
Yeah, so instantly fast. So clearly for him, the bike was a big problem.
Yes.
That's incredible to me. Well, I think this has been pretty good. Anything in the 250s? I'm going to go over a couple names. You tell me if they're going to make the main on night one.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to give you a couple random names that are on my list. Do you think AJ Cannizzaro makes the main night one?
That's a tough one. I don't think he does. To be honest, he didn't make a single main in 450s. I think his bike is okay. I don't think it's great. He also had talked about running a 125 for a couple races, like
Yeah.
doing the stank dog thing. And I mean, I think that's great. Let's be honest. He's not in it for the competitive aspect. He's in
No.
it for the Moto Academy and he enjoys it, which is awesome. We need people like that, but I don't think he's going to make first main.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's way behind the 8 ball in training. If he really wanted to do it right, that training would have started in November.
Yeah.
He would have had he doesn't have the time. But I love him. He's a good guy. He's good technique. Definitely check him out of the Moto Academy. Moving down the list, how about a guy like, Lane Shaw? Let's see you were like, know everybody in the sport. So I'm curious, what do you think about Lane?
I'm not super keen on Lane Shaw. I'm going to spin that one back to you because I'm assuming that you have a little bit more knowledge in that sense.
Lane is a Texas boy. He actually raced a couple of my clients coming up, and he did very well at Loretta's and C, and that was about his end of his amateur success. He did, he made Loretta's and stuff, but wasn't like a standout amateur. But he is incredibly gifted at Supercross as compared to outdoors. So here's a guy who could, no offense to him, barely make outdoors, right? But he has made main events in 250 Supercross 2 or 3 years in a row now. I think 2 years in a row. So this is the most stacked East has ever been. I feel bad for some of these private guys because they were thinking go East, they'll be a little stacked. Typically West Coast gets some of the heavy hitters, and that just wasn't the case this year.
No, it did not happen that way.
Loaded. So I'm going to say, yes, he makes a main because he's an amazing starter, which I think is what's going to determine whether or not who makes mains. It's going to come down to starts during heat races. Lane has pulled whole shots. So I think, yes, he'll make 1 or 2. I hope he makes more. I really like Lane. He's a great guy. He's got a great channel. You can check him out. How about the Suzuki boys? Are you familiar at all with Drake or Kilroy?
Yes. No, I've seen them a little bit. The Suzuki bike on the West this year's been okay. Mumford's been doing pretty daggum good. I mean, he's had a couple top 10s, a couple crashes here and there, but I mean, it's not a factory team. I don't think the bike's going to contend for anything more than, a top 10. I don't see him jumping up in the top 5 unless it's late in the season and people aren't there. But I think we could definitely see some mains from those boys. I mean, like I said, Mumford been doing great. He's got a couple career best finishes. He was barely making night shows last year just to see that improvement.
That is a huge improvement. That's a great point. I forgot about that.
So I think for somebody like that had all the hype and then kind of flopped last year, to be able to show that much improvement tells me that they've got something working on that bike. And Suzuki's not really funding that bike. Like that is not a factory team. So that's not a new bike, I don't believe.
Right.
So being able to have another year on that, I think is definitely going to benefit these East Coast boys.
Interesting. So I'm curious on the Club MX boys. You have Phil Nicoletti, Enzo Lopez, and one more.
It's Jace, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, Jace Owen. Jace is an amazing starter. Yes. He actually basically ended Martin Davalos' career, in my opinion, not in a negative way.
He really took him out.
Start in Dallas or Houston. Here comes Josh wide open and just blows out Martin Davalos. And that was literally the end of Davalos' title runs. He never competed again after that. But he's a good starter. So I think he can make mains. But again, he's never been an elite level speed guy. But what do you think? Who's the best of the Club MX guys? Who's going to be at the end of the season the most points?
That's a really tough one because the Club MX bike, I'll be honest, I had really high hopes coming in for it with Marchbanks on the West. And I'm not entirely sure if it was like illness. They've talked about on the broadcast that Marchbanks either wasn't feeling great or the bike wasn't quite good or he was injured. But outside of the heat race win in A3, he is really not impressed very well at all. He had a decent run last weekend, but I don't think that bike has as much pace as I originally thought. Just for a throwback, I'm going to say Phil Nicoletti is going to come home the top of the Club MX guys, but I don't expect a ton from them. I mean, even on the West, like Dominic Thury has been horribly off the pace. I mean, like almost missing mains. So I'm not super confident that we're going to have all of the Club MX boys in the main.
So here's an interesting question coming from the non-moto background.
Yes.
In our sport, the bike is the first thing to get blamed, but it's also not talked about in the way that it is in Formula One or MotoGP. You said the bike doesn't have the pace. And it's an interesting comment because a friend of mine, who I hope to get on the show the next time, his comments have been, and I think Jamie at Twist is great, and I think he does an awesome job. So this is not a knock on them, but he feels like their bike is a little off the pace this year from the factory bikes. Yeah. He feels like not, and we could be off base here, but he just feels like it doesn't quite have the motor that the elite bikes do in the class. And I personally think, I mean, it's nothing obvious that it's slow. Like there's nowhere that it's just obviously off the pace, but I have seen him really stretching some of the tough rhythms to get out of corners.
Yes.
I mean, that's been obvious to me. He's a bigger guy, but he's really been stretching them. And the Yamaha's strong attributes are in torque, in snap, in like engine RPM and response. So it feels very responsive when you ride the bike. Anybody who rides it casually would say it's the fastest bike. But if you actually really go drag race it versus other packages, oftentimes it's not. So I think that these pros get wowed by the fact that Star dominates. They go hop on a stock Yamaha and go, wow, this thing's awesome for a stock bike.
It feels good, but not necessarily.
It feels good, but it doesn't necessarily deliver lap times the way that you would think that it would for how good it feels. And I think that that's what they're stuck in. It's not that the bike's bad, but they're not a factory effort. They do have a set budget. It's not like they're, for example, the Bar X team done by Twisted has pulled some whole shots. Mumford is a big kid, right? Club MX, same engine builder, different bike, has not pulled whole shots this year.
Not even close.
Although I guess he did well in the heat race. But interestingly, when it comes down to budgets, Bar X Suzuki running an electric water pump. I don't know if you've seen some footage of that. Club MX Yamaha not running an electric water pump. Same engine builder. So you have to think that maybe they've just invested X amount into budget, and then they're at their number. They're going to keep the bikes, they've been reliable. So other than the water pump hose, I mean, that's nothing they can do anything about, right?
Yeah.
So they've been reliable. So maybe they're just at the end of their budget this season, and that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, for that team to come back next year, you can exceed that budget. Like we all want them to just blow the spending out and go compete up front. But if we want them to stick around for a year, they have to stick by that budget. So, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. We'll see how they can do on the
I'm really looking forward to your show on ideas for funding in the sport. I bet you're going to touch on a following of a couple of topics, being Mike Genova, Tony Alessi, Moto Concepts team have touched on profit sharing. These teams need to get a part of the pool from Feld. Feld needs to incentivize them, kind of like in the NFL, where all of the teams are in a kitty. They share revenue. Certain teams get more than others, but they certainly share revenue. I do agree with that. Because it's not fair to put the onus of funding entirely on some private entity, and then they have to build success. So it's like, how do you compete against an established factory team, right? And go get success to go get sponsors, but you're actually there part of the show. You're contributing to this show that would not exist without these teams, right? So I'm actually blown away that our sport does not have some form of profit sharing. Hey, your guy made a main event. Thanks for being here. Here's some money outside of the purse money for the rider that goes to the teams. The other thing that our sport doesn't do is allow merchandising sales within the paddocks of the team's own value. So you have to license it through Feld. That is absolutely crushing our sport. And Feld's making money. But
that is actually what I was going to touch on in my video, because I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah.
It is mind blowing that I have to get this thing from Indonesia for $45 when I can't just go buy it at the rider shop. That is unbelievable to me. We'll touch on that.
Yeah,
One final question. Who is your pick? I've already said mine's Jett Lawrence. Do you have a set pick for the 250 East Coast Championship?
So I'm going to go ahead and say Jeremy Martin, because he's the veteran. He's in crazy good shape. He proved that he can get through Supercross healthy. The Geico year last year was a fluke deal. He got jumped on. Nothing he could deal with.
That was terrible to watch.
Yeah, and Denny Stevenson had, I think, a poor take on that. Oh, he should retire. He backed out. Go watch it in slow mo. A guy in front of him got squirrely. He backed out of it to not jump on the guy, which is what your job is in moto, is to take care of what's in front of you. Yep. The guy behind him, who was a rookie, went for it, landed on him. Season over. Yeah. So I do think that he's going to be my pick just because of his veteranness, how fit he is. He's on the best bike we know. And he's had a pretty good offseason for what I've heard and seen. He has plenty of time to get prepared. So I don't think I've heard of any like nagging little injuries. He's healthy enough to go out and be successful. So I think Jett's the wonder kid. He's the new modern day James Stewart.
Yep.
Without a doubt. However, I just think he's a little too crazy balls at times. And Jeremy Martin's veteran knowledge and wisdom is going to come through and win that title.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely see. Looking forward to having you on the show, and hopefully me being a part of your show a little bit too. Glad we could do that. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Derek. Really appreciate it.
Tyler, been a pleasure. Hope to see you soon. We'll see you at the shifter cart track. I'm going to kick your asses next time. You'll be getting the better of me. So we're going to see you out on the shifter cart track coming up soon.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much, and we will see y'all later.
All right. Take care.